Beyond Conspiracy, Part 2. Now, as I've already stated, we know that we are living in a manipulated state, manipulated by the mysterious them, and we want, or think we want, to get out of it. Now, we are actually living in a snowballing situation because our existence is quite a strange thing. It's very strange indeed, although once you get used to the idea, the proposed real-world reality seems completely absurd. So I'll begin with a simple image and then we'll take it on a bit further. Imagine first off that humanity is all one multicellular organism, and that somewhere there is one all-encompassing consciousness, one body, and that we are all cells within that body. Now, like any multicellular organism, the individual cells serve specific purposes within the whole. There are eye cells that help you see, and bone cells that hold it all up, and muscle cells that work together to make it all move, and blood cells that run around all over the place at very high speeds, ferrying essential supplies around, liver and kidney cells for processing and refining raw materials, and brain cells for thinking, and nerves for sending information around. And all of these cells are born, perform their function, die, and are recycled or ejected. In your body, there is no obvious governing intelligence that makes this happen. Your brain doesn't deal with all of that, but there is a code, and all the cells follow the code and fulfill their role. However, there are cells that do decide not to follow the code, and generally we call this cancer. Now, most healthy humans produce at least 10,000 cancer cells per day. That's 10,000 cells that don't want to follow the common code. A healthy human immune system identifies these and destroys them, and or if the mutation of the code within the non-conforming cells is a positive attribute to the whole, the new code may be allowed to propagate around the body and actually change the genetic code of the individual during his or her own lifetime. It is a personal opinion of mine, founded on thin air, that I cannot believe we die with the same genetic code we are born with, as the genetic code is information and we spend our lives absorbing and digesting information. As a society, we have largely lost the ability to hear the common code, and any conspiracy theorist worth his or her salt will be able to list out a whole load of interconnected reasons why. So, now let's make it a little more complicated. Essentially, from what I've come to understand and from what I've experienced, we are all one consciousness experiencing ourself as lots of individual consciousnesses. It's a fractal thing. And this means that you are me and I am you. And not only that, but we are all part of the same organism called humanity that lives on the planet Earth. And not only that, but the whole experience becomes ever more complicated as each new bit of this self-absorbing soup experiences the whole from yet another bloody point of view. The whole is just on an infinite learning mission. The end. So how has that ended up in such an awful mess? Well, the physical reality that we share is the accumulated result of our collective unconsciousness manifesting itself on a physical level. It is a direct reflection of the state of our minds and especially our emotions. And this in itself is not very encouraging stuff when you look at the world in the face. However, it does back up the very empowering idea that we do create our own universe. I create mine and you create yours. And in the middle where it all crosses over, well, the resulting physical world is just the sum total of all of our emotions and thoughts. Now, if you knew this and you decided you could use it to your own advantage, you could work out all sorts of naughty little ways to harness the creative energy of others and steer it towards creating a world as you would prefer it. This is why certain knowledge was sealed away hermetically, and for many people still is, and most probably always will be. Wisdom can only be heard by ears that are ready to listen. Now, I personally believe there was a time when this specific know-how of how we are directly linked to our reality as co-creators was common knowledge, and that humans living at this time had a lot less sense of themselves as individuals apart from the rest of it all, and that alignment with each other, with nature, and even with the heavenly bodies and cycles was very, 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 very important. I'll even go as far as to say that towns and cities were once built aligned with the stars, and that urbanization policies were to perpetually move certain parts of stone buildings and cities to keep them aligned harmoniously with stars and stellar energies to ensure the good health of the inhabitants and the surrounding environment. The following quote is from one of those books by Doris Lessing, The Syrian Experiments. Remember, it's an apparent work of fiction. He spoke of places beyond the waters where an advanced medicine was used based on local balances and earth forces, based on the rhythms of the stars and on the disposition of exactly placed and planned buildings and on the use of plants. This medicine was more than curative or preventative. Health was considered as a result and an expression of the exact sciences used by a whole society and taught to every individual in the society. Health was being in balance with the natural forces of the galaxy. Yes, he went so far, and yes, I was all ears, because this is what I had wanted to know. He was talking about the necessity. End quote. Just for information, the word necessity in all of Doris Lessing's books is always written with a capital N. I'll even jump onto that Graham Hancock theory and say that after the Great Flood, certain historical figures like Manu and Thoth tried desperately to put this pre-disaster culture back into place. The disaster, that's dis-asta, which means out of astrological alignment, went a lot deeper than just a civilization-destroying flood. The fear and panic and the subsequent failure to be able to realign with certain astrological factors created a certain chaos where once there had been a common and harmonious theme, and with the world in such a state, certain individuals could use these sciences for their own personal gain, and so the knowledge was considered too bloody dangerous to be kept in the public domain. Unfortunately, at some point this knowledge most definitely got into the wrong hands and has been used to rule, exploit and dominate ever since, even if there have always been a curious group of parallel initiates trying to maintain the good uses of the same knowledge. You see, when we get right down to it, it doesn't actually matter what set of rules you make up about reality. If enough people believe the rules you have written, reality follows suit like an obedient little puppy. It's all about imposition of information and bums on seats. There are, however, certain limits to the design of the system that you can use. They are the 7 natural laws, and although they cannot be broken, they can be twisted quite a bit. So, let's have a look at some recent history and see how some of today's sheep pens were created. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire took over the teachings of this guy called Jesus, making one very fundamental difference. One single word, in fact. They changed an A into a the, a non-definite article into a definite one. It could almost be an error of translation, but as we will see later, spelling mistakes and errors of translation become quite a common theme throughout the manipulated history. Jesus was some kind of incredibly strong person. He rewrote the rules of reality at a critical time, and like our epoch today, it was also a stellar transitional period with a lot of upheaval, so of course his following was understandably very big. He told us that he was a Son of God, as we all are if we want to use those terms to express the same meaning, so let's just translate that into nuts and bolts so we know where we stand and nobody gets any ideas about being a bloody Messiah. If God is the infinitely exploding ball of fractal and subfractal consciousness of which each of us is an internal observer, then we are all sons of God. The Holy Roman Empire changed it to the Son of God. Now, Jesus' original message was, of course, universal peace. He displayed an amazing set of healing capacities, a very high level of intelligence, the capacity to manipulate the physical reality around him at will from time to time, and enough strength of character to go against the system and try to create popular freedom for all and by all. He led by example, and he not only managed it, but he also gave us the keys to how to evolve to that level if we so choose. It's not surprising he got nailed up, is it? The subsequent following that developed from his teachings got well out of hand because he had officially given away the keys of the kingdom of earth and seriously put the empire out of reckoning. After some 300 years of crucifying, burning, throwing to lions and generally tracking the hell out of this rebel alliance, the empire finally gave in and made these teachings its universal doctrine. This is what empires do in the face of an idea they cannot crush. You see, empires never actually crumble. They just disappear for a time and then pop back up, waving a twisted dogma of the doctrine that crumbled them. There is a very valuable lesson to be learned here. Just take a look at how the Pope is suddenly an ecologist. Now, he could be genuine or he could be playing games, and without being in the same room as the man, who could tell? Now, by making Jesus the Son of God and not a Son of God, everything that he was as a fully functioning human being became quite simply unattainable for the masses. They put it out of reach. The poor wretched citizens that remained couldn't possibly hope to attain this level. They could just get on their knees and beg for forgiveness for all of their unworthiness and do exactly as the Pope told them to. Now, this was quite different from the energy harness in which we are trapped today. This was a spiritual harness, and here is, in nuts and bolts terms, more or less how it works. Your target population are a subsistence people. They live in very close proximity with the natural world, and they have a vast amount of cultural knowledge that allows them to live, albeit rather simply. They grow their own food, they produce their own seeds, they spin and weave fabrics, collect and use herbs for medicines and dyeing, raise and butcher animals for meat, fats, they cure hides, they manufacture by hand an amazing amount of complex things like bread, cheese, fabrics, beads. They also know how to work metal, stone, glass, wood and clay. They can build their own shelters with quite high levels of sophistication as well. Essentially, they don't bloody need you at all, and left to their own devices, they would eventually work out better and more comfortable and easier ways to live, put away good-sized reserves of firewood, beer, wine and food, and then just generally have a good time eating and drinking and playing music and making little presents to offer each other at that time of year when it gets too dark and cold to go and do anything outside, and it's just nice to burn a few extra candles and spend some quality time with the family and neighbours by the fire while it's dark and cold outside. Now, they can do all of these things with no organised education system, and if we believe the history books, they managed to do all this without knowing how to read, write, count, or do any kind of mathematics. Now, you cannot have a population living in such proximity with the natural world and have them believe that there is no such thing as spirit as we do today. Spirit is nature, and nature speaks to humans on a daily level when they live in such harmonious proximity to it. So, if you want all of these incredibly autonomous people to do as you say, you need some kind of false fear that you can then offer them protection from in exchange for a good enough percentage of their wealth to keep them as far away from comfort and abundance as you possibly can, without them actually getting up and revolting against you. And it is a very fine line to sail, but don't forget we are talking about specialists in the field with long ages of experience. On the physical level, the church ordained a whole cascading hierarchy of kings, dukes, regents, lords, lordy-pantses and counts, all invested with divine right of rule and duty to protect the people from harm, but there wasn't any harm to protect them from, so they were then promptly ordered to fight and squabble amongst themselves, which creates the suggested harm and then requires the levying of resources and especially lives from the population. This obviously keeps the male population reasonably low most of the time, and it also creates enough poverty to keep the playing field nice and on a steep slope. Then the church takes a further 10% of what is left to maintain the church and its bejeweled priests, all of which are supposed to be there to help and guide the poor through all the difficult times, but they're of course there keeping track of bloodlines and bastards and things like that. Now, at the top of all this, there is of course a god, but this is not the same god we were talking about earlier, quite the opposite in fact. This is another god and another one of history's typing mistakes, because this is the god that man made in his own image and not the other way round, as is so frequently written in Genesis. This is the god with the capital G, the beard, the cloudy sofas and the cherubs and stuff. Now, the people living in this new Holy Roman Empire were taught very quickly at sword point to be very good, God-fearing people. And then we fall under majority rule a generation later because it's severely frowned upon if you don't go off to church on a Sunday and partake in these oddball, cannibalistic, symbolic ceremonies. You see, sheep follow sheep, and it was even written on the stained glass windows as a bit of a bad joke. Jesus the good shepherd tending his flock, and the high priests all carrying ceremonial shepherd's crooks around, and still nobody really cottoned on. Sorry, that should be wooled on because cotton hadn't been invented yet. Now, any people not following the dogma were considered to be witches and Wiccans and oddballs, and these are rapidly ostracised by the mainstay of the flock and regularly the victims of quite severe eradication campaigns. These marginals are very interesting people. These are those parallel initiates I was talking about earlier, also known as shamans. Beyond Conspiracy, Part 2.